All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be delving into some, let's be honest, pretty controversial territory. We're going to be talking about Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation, SIFE, or as it was originally called, IYDT Misjad Zaitani.
Right.
And you've given us a really interesting mix of sources for this one. Online discussions, articles, even court documents.
Oh.
So it's going to be really interesting to see what we can make of all of this.
I think what's interesting is how the narrative around SIF is filled with such stark contrast. On one hand, you have Butler positioned as this revered spiritual leader guiding his followers towards enlightenment.
Right.
But on the other hand, there are these serious accusations of misconduct, financial impropriety,
Yeah.
even whispers of cult-like practices.
Yeah, it's a lot, and that's what we're here to unpack today.
Yeah.
So to try and get to the bottom of this, maybe we can start at the beginning.
Okay.
With Chris Butler himself.
Sure.
What can you tell us about his background?
Well, our sources suggest that Butler was initially drawn to Eastern spirituality pretty early on, it seems.
Okay.
And he was actually involved with ISKCON, the Hare Krishna movement, for a while.
Okay.
Before eventually breaking away to form his own group.
Right.
Which ultimately became SEF.
Now, I did notice something in the sources about Butler adopting the title Paramahamsa.
Right.
Even though he's married.
Yeah.
And that seemed a bit unusual, doesn't it?
It does raise some questions.
Yeah.
You see, in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, a sannyasin, which means a renunciate,
Right.
is traditionally expected to be celibate.
Huh.
And the Paramahamsa title is like a highly respected one within that tradition,
Right.
reserved for those who have achieved a certain level of spiritual mastery and detachment from worldly affairs.
Yeah.
So Butler's decision to marry, while also claiming this title, definitely raised eyebrows.
Even back then?
Even back then, yeah.
So essentially, it sounds like his actions kind of contradict the traditional understanding of a sannyasin.
It seems that way, yeah.
I'm curious, how did his followers perceive this?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
It seems there were mixed reactions.
Okay.
Some followers saw it as a sign of his unique path and his ability to kind of transcend traditional boundaries.
Right.
While others felt it was a departure from, the expected norms.
Yeah.
This tension between tradition and Butler's personal choices would continue to play a role throughout Sikh's history.
Interesting. Okay, so Butler breaks from ISKCON, starts his own group, which becomes SIF, formerly Iway, Misjad Zaitani.
Yes.
What are their core beliefs then?
So SIF draws from various elements of Eastern spirituality.
Okay.
But it's particularly rooted in the Gaudiya Vaishnava lineage,
Okay.
which emphasizes devotional practices and the chanting of Hare Krishna mantras.
Got it.
They incorporate yoga and promote a vegetarian lifestyle as part of their spiritual practice.
Right.
But their teachings are ultimately centered around the idea of achieving self-realization and connecting with a higher power through devotion to the guru, who in this case is Chris Butler himself.
Right. Okay, so we have this foundation of Eastern spiritual practices, but then things take a bit of a turn when we look at the accusations of financial impropriety.
Right.
You mentioned conflicting narratives earlier.
Yes.
And some sources allege that there was exploitation of followers, questionable donations,
Right.
and even links to drug trafficking. That's quite a jump.
It is.
Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. There are numerous accounts, especially from former members,
Okay.
detailing how they felt pressured to give substantial tithes and donations to the organization.
Oh, wow.
Some even claimed they were told their contributions were necessary for their spiritual advancement.
Really?
However, the sources allege there was very little transparency on how these funds were actually being used by SEF.
That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is.
Did any of the sources provide specifics about these financial practices?
Yes, some former members describe a culture of constant fundraising within SEF, with leaders emphasizing the importance of giving generously. For example, one source alleges that members were instructed to donate a percentage of their income.
Wow.
Regardless of their personal financial situation.
Regardless.
Yeah, and there were also claims that SIF pressured members to take out loans or even sell personal belongings to contribute financially.
It sounds really intense.
It does.
This lack of financial transparency, combined with the pressure to donate, definitely raises some concerns about potential exploitation.
Definitely.
Yeah, it definitely paints a concerning picture, especially when you consider the teachings about compassion and spiritual well-being.
Yeah.
It seems like a stark contrast.
Right.
Allegedly pushing followers to their financial limits while promoting a message of inner peace.
Exactly. And this leads us to another troubling aspect of SIF's financial activities,
Yeah.
the allegations of their involvement with Patrick Bowler,
Okay.
also known as Paramahamsa Das.
Okay. Now, Bowler was a significant financial contributor to SIF,
Right.
but he also had a past conviction for drug trafficking. Wait, so a convicted drug trafficker was heavily involved with this supposedly spiritual organization.
That's what the sources suggest, yeah.
That seems like a huge red flag.
It does.
Did the sources provide any insights into the nature of his involvement?
Well, it's important to note that Saif has consistently denied any involvement in or knowledge of Bowler's illegal activities.
Okay.
However, his close ties to the organization and his significant financial contributions raise suspicion among critics.
Yeah, I can understand why.
Some sources allege that Saif may have even benefited financially from Bowler's illegal ventures,
Oh, wow.
though concrete evidence to support this claim remains elusive.
This is getting more and more complicated.
Yeah.
And then there's this note about Saif selling off a bunch of properties.
Right.
Where did all that money go?
That's a question many former members and critics have been asking.
Yeah.
Several sources mention that Saif sold numerous properties over the years,
Okay.
generating substantial profits.
Yep.
However, the exact whereabouts of these funds remain unclear.
Huh.
Saif hasn't publicly disclosed how this money was used,
Wow.
leading to further speculation and allegations of financial mismanagement.
It all sounds very suspicious, especially considering the accusations of members struggling to afford basic necessities while the organization seemed to be accumulating wealth.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here regarding Chris Butler's background,
Yes.
the origins of SIF,
Mm-hmm.
and these troubling allegations of financial impropriety.
Yes.
But there's another layer to this story that we need to explore.
Okay.
Many sources describe SIF as having cult-like characteristics,
Yeah.
with accusations of psychological manipulation and control over members' lives.
Right.
And this is where things get really serious. What can you tell us about these allegations?
These are indeed serious allegations, and there are numerous accounts from former members
Okay.
detailing experiences that align with classic cult-like behavior. They describe a highly controlled environment where individual autonomy was discouraged,
Right.
and obedience to Chris Butler was paramount.
Can you give us some specific examples of this alleged manipulation and control?
Certainly one common tactic mentioned is love bombing.
Love bombing.
Yeah. Where new recruits are showered with affection and attention,
Okay.
creating a sense of belonging and dependence on the group.
Okay.
Others speak of being subjected to intense pressure to conform to SIF's strict rules and expectations,
Right.
governing everything from their diet and dress code to their relationships and career choices.
Oh, wow.
There are even allegations of members being isolated from their families and friends, cutting off their external support systems and making them more reliant on the organization.
We actually have a particularly disturbing anecdote about a former member named Ramadas Ranson.
Oh, okay.
He claims that SIF essentially destroyed his life.
Wow.
What can you tell us about his experience?
Ranson's account is incredibly chilling.
Yeah.
He describes how SIF manipulated him psychologically,
Uh-huh.
leading him to cut ties with his family and friends.
Right.
He claims the organization exploited him financially and left him emotionally scarred.
That's awful.
His story highlights the devastating impact that such allegedly controlling groups can have on individuals.
His story, along with the others we've discussed, it really raises concerns about the potential for psychological harm within SIF.
It does, yeah.
Did any other sources share similar experiences?
Yes. There's another disturbing case from Poland involving a young woman known as Kapija.
Okay.
After joining SIF, Kadoya reportedly underwent significant behavioral changes, becoming increasingly withdrawn and dependent on the organization.
Wow.
Some sources suggest that her involvement with SIF led to a regression in her mental development and a complete reliance on the group for her every need.
That's heartbreaking.
It is.
These accounts really make you question the true nature of SIF and its impact on its members.
Yeah.
But before we delve deeper into the allegations of cult-like practices, we need to address another controversial aspect of this story, the connection to Tulsi Gabbard.
Right.
What can you tell us about her involvement with SIF?
Gabbard's connection to SIF is multi-layered and has been a source of significant controversy,
Okay.
especially during her time in politics.
Right.
Her family has a long-standing relationship with the organization.
Okay.
Her parents have been associated with SIF for many years, and Gabbard herself has acknowledged her connection to the group.
But her involvement with SIF goes beyond her family ties, right?
It does, yes.
There have been accusations of a deeper influence on her political stances, particularly her views on LGBTQ plus rights.
That's right. Some of Gabbard's political contributions, particularly those coming from individuals connected to SIF, have been scrutinized.
Okay.
There are allegations that these donations might be linked to SIF's potentially ill-gotten funds,
Right.
raising ethical concerns about the source of her campaign financing.
And it goes even deeper than that, doesn't it?
It does.
Some argue that Butler's teachings, which have been criticized for promoting conservative social views, directly influenced Gabbard's political positions,
Right.
especially her stance on LGBTQ plus rights.
That's another point of contention.
Okay.
Critics argue that Gabbard's views on certain social issues, particularly those aligning with Butler's own conservative stances,
Yeah.
raise concerns about undue influence and potential conflicts of interest.
Right.
They question whether her political decisions are truly her own or whether they are shaped by the teachings of her guru, Chris Butler.
This is getting more and more tangled.
It is, yeah.
So it seems like we're dealing with a complex web of questionable finances,
Right.
potential cult-like behavior, and a controversial connection to a prominent political figure.
Yeah.
But this isn't just a localized issue in Hawaii.
No, it's not.
SIF has a global presence, right?
They do.
What can you tell us about their international reach?
So SIF's influence extends far beyond Hawaii.
Well?
They have established branches in various countries across the globe, including Australia, New Zealand, Russia, Ukraine, the Philippines, and Poland.
Wow.
They have built a truly international network, spreading their teachings and attracting followers from diverse backgrounds.
Are there any notable figures within this global network?
Let me think.
Anyone who stands out in terms of their role or influence within SIF?
One name that pops up frequently is Johnny Baldwin Midget,
Okay.
also known as Balakilia Das.
Okay.
He's been described as a key figure in SIF's operations, particularly in terms of their political activities and various business ventures.
Okay.
He's often seen as Butler's right-hand man and a driving force behind SIF's global expansion.
And I noticed something in the sources about a movie called The Lost Prince, produced by a company called Ty Leaf Productions.
Yeah.
What's the connection to SIF?
Ah, yes, that production was quite controversial.
Really?
Ty Leaf Productions was linked to SIF,
Okay.
and the film was accused of being a front for the organization to promote their ideologies
Oh, wow.
and potentially generate funds.
It faced a lot of backlash,
Okay.
including allegations of financial impropriety and exploitation of those involved in the production.
Wow, this just keeps getting deeper and deeper.
It does. It's a rabbit hole.
So we have Chris Butler, the spiritual leader with this controversial past,
Right.
an organization with questionable financial practices and allegations of cult-like behavior, a connection to Tulsi Gabbard,
Yeah.
and a global network extending to multiple continents.
It's a lot to take in.
It's a lot to unpack, but before we get into the specifics of SIF's alleged cult-like practices,
Okay.
there's a bigger question we need to address.
What's that?
How do we reconcile Butler's teachings,
Right.
which often emphasize self-realization, compassion, and ethical living,
Yes.
with these accusations of harmful and exploitative practices within SIF?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the central paradox that we need to explore.
Yeah.
How could an organization with seemingly noble intentions,
Right.
promoting spirituality and personal growth,
Be accused of such serious wrongdoings?
Yeah.
Is it possible for good intentions to pave the road to unintended consequences?
Right.
To answer these questions, we need to look at the experiences of those who were directly involved with SIF.
That makes sense. We need to hear the stories of those who lived within this organization to
Right.
truly understand the impact of Butler's teachings
Yes.
and the reality of SIF's practices. But that's a conversation for our next segment.
Okay.
For now, dear listener, take a moment to ponder this central question.
Okay.
Can an organization truly go astray from its original purpose, even if it started with good intentions? And what role do factors like charisma, power dynamics, and blind faith play in this potential for deviation?
Good question.
Keep those questions in mind as we continue our deep dive into the world of Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation.
It's a question that has puzzled many who have studied SIF and other similar organizations. How can a group that espouses love and compassion and self-discovery end up embroiled in such controversy.
It's almost like a cautionary tale, right?
Yeah.
About the potential for even the most well-intentioned spiritual paths to kind of veer off course.
Right.
What do you think are some of the factors that might contribute to this kind of deviation?
Well, one key element is the dynamics of power and authority.
Okay.
In many spiritual organizations, there's a natural tendency for followers to place immense trust
Right.
and even reverence in the leader. And this can create an environment where critical thinking is discouraged
Yeah.
and questioning the leader's decisions or teachings becomes taboo.
We've seen that pattern in some of the sources we've examined, haven't we?
Yep, Dad.
Former members describing an atmosphere where they felt pressured to conform
Right.
and afraid to express any doubts or dissent.
Yeah, and it makes it really hard to leave.
Is it possible that Butler's charisma and the emphasis on obedience to the guru within Seth might have contributed to this kind of environment?
It's certainly a possibility worth considering.
Yeah.
Butler's charisma, as we discussed earlier, was undeniable.
Right.
He had a way of captivating people and inspiring deep devotion. And within Sif's teachings, there's a strong emphasis on the importance of surrendering to the guru's guidance,
Okay.
seeing him as a direct conduit to spiritual enlightenment.
You mentioned earlier that Sif draws heavily from the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition,
Yes.
which I'll admit I'm not too familiar with.
That's okay.
Can you tell us a bit more about that tradition and its relevance to this discussion?
Of course, the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition is a branch of Hinduism that originated in India
Okay.
and emphasizes devotional practices and the chanting of Hare Krishna mantras as a path to liberation.
Okay.
Within this tradition, the guru, or a spiritual teacher, plays a central role,
Right.
guiding disciples towards spiritual awakening.
So devotion to the guru is an important aspect of this tradition.
It is, but there's also an emphasis on critical thinking and questioning within certain lineages.
So there's a balance within the tradition itself between devotion and critical inquiry.
Exactly. It's not about blindly following the guru's every word,
Right.
but rather engaging in a dialogue,
Okay.
seeking understanding,
Uh-huh.
and ultimately developing one's own discernment.
Okay.
However, it's important to note that not all interpretations of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition emphasize this balance equally.
Right.
Some branches tend to lean towards a more authoritarian structure,
Okay.
where questioning the guru is seen as disrespectful or even detrimental to spiritual progress.
It seems like that emphasis on unquestioning obedience, coupled with Butler's charisma,
Right.
could have created a fertile ground for potential manipulation within Seth.
It's a valid concern, and when you add in factors like social isolation and financial pressure,
Yeah.
the risk of abuse becomes even more significant.
You've mentioned social isolation a couple of times now.
I have, yeah.
Can you elaborate on how that might contribute to the dynamics of a potentially harmful spiritual group?
Sure. In many groups that exhibit cult-like tendencies,
Right.
there's a deliberate effort to isolate members from their outside support systems,
Yeah.
family, friends, even former colleagues.
Right.
This creates a situation where the group becomes the individual's sole source of information,
Wow.
validation, and even identity.
That's scary.
It is, and it makes it much harder for individuals to question the group's teachings or to leave, even if they're feeling unhappy or uncomfortable.
We saw that in Ramadas Ranson's story, didn't we?
We did, yes.
How he described being systematically cut off from his loved ones
Right.
and manipulated into complete dependence on Sif.
It's a classic tactic, unfortunately.
It's chilling to think about how vulnerable someone can become in that kind of situation.
It is incredibly disturbing, and it highlights the importance of recognizing the red flags that might indicate a group is heading down a dangerous path.
Speaking of red flags, what are some of the warning signs that our listeners should be aware of? Things that might suggest a spiritual group is becoming unhealthy or potentially harmful.
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
One major red flag is an excessive emphasis on obedience and submission to the leader,
Okay.
especially if any questioning or dissenting opinions are met with punishment or ostracization.
Right.
A healthy spiritual community should encourage open dialogue,
Yeah.
respectful debate, and individual autonomy.
It's like that saying, if you're not allowed to leave, it's not a school, it's a prison.
Exactly. Another red flag is financial pressure, like we discussed earlier with Sif.
Right.
If members are constantly being asked to contribute money,
Yeah.
especially with little transparency on how those funds are being used. That's a major cause for concern.
And then there's the isolation factor we just discussed.
Right.
If a group encourages or even demands that members cut ties with their loved ones, or discourages them from engaging with the outside world,
Exactly.
that's a huge red flag.
Absolutely. Healthy spiritual communities should support individuals in maintaining their relationships and connections outside the group.
Right.
They should encourage members to be active participants in the wider world, not cut them off from it.
These are all incredibly important points for our listeners to consider.
I agree.
It's so easy to get caught up in the allure of a charismatic leader or the promise of spiritual fulfillment. But it's vital to remain vigilant and to recognize these warning signs.
I couldn't agree more. And it's not just about protecting ourselves. It's also about looking out for our loved ones.
Right.
If we notice these red flags in a group that someone we care about is involved with, it's important to approach the situation with compassion and concern.
So how do we do that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
How do we approach a loved one who might be involved in a potentially harmful group without pushing them further away or making them defensive?
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
The key is to avoid attacking their beliefs or trying to force them out of the group.
Okay.
Instead, focus on expressing your concerns about specific behaviors you've observed and emphasizing your love and support for them as an individual. Encourage them to think critically about their experiences within the group.
Okay.
And to consider whether their needs are truly being met.
It's about empowering them to make their own informed choices, not dictating what they should believe or do.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that leaving a group like this can be a difficult and even traumatic process.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It often requires professional guidance and support from loved ones.
Okay.
There are resources available to help individuals who are struggling to disentangle themselves from a harmful group.
Right.
And we can provide some links to those resources in the show notes for our listeners.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked a lot about the potential dangers of spiritual seeking.
Right.
But it's important to remember that not all spiritual groups are harmful.
Definitely not.
In fact, many people find immense joy, purpose, and connection through their spiritual practices.
Absolutely.
So how do we ensure that our own spiritual seeking remains healthy and empowering?
That's a wonderful question.
Yeah.
And I think it comes back to the importance of discernment and critical thinking.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
To research the background of any spiritual teacher or group you're considering joining. And to compare their teachings to other traditions.
It's like doing your due diligence before making a major investment.
Exactly.
You wouldn't just blindly hand over your life savings without checking the track record, right?
Exactly.
Your spiritual well-being deserves the same level of scrutiny.
Absolutely. Another key factor is maintaining a sense of balance.
Okay.
Don't let any one group or teaching consume your entire identity.
Right.
Keep nurturing your relationships, your hobbies, your other interests.
Yeah.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
And what about intuition?
Yeah.
I've heard people say, if something feels off, trust your gut. How important is that in the context of spiritual seeking?
Intuition is incredibly important.
Okay.
If something feels wrong.
Right.
If you're experiencing discomfort or unease within a group, don't ignore those feelings.
Okay.
Trust your inner wisdom.
Yeah.
You have the right to walk away from any situation that feels harmful or manipulative.
Right.
Even if it's cloaked in spiritual language.
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
We often get so caught up in the external validation, the desire to belong, or the fear of being judged, that we silence that inner voice.
It's a common trap. But remember, genuine spiritual growth should enhance your life, not diminish it.
Right.
It should foster compassion, empathy, and self-awareness, not fear, guilt, or dependence.
Right.
If your spiritual path is causing you pain or leading you away from your values, it might be time to reassess.
That's a powerful reminder.
Yeah.
So to circle back to Chris Butler and see, what's the key takeaway for our listeners today?
Let me think for a second. Okay.
What can we learn from this deep dive into this complex and controversial world?
I think the most important takeaway is that even organizations with seemingly noble intentions can become corrupted.
Right.
Power can be intoxicating. And blind devotion can blind us to potential red flags.
Yeah.
We need to be critical thinkers.
Yeah.
Discerning consumers of spiritual teachings. And above all, prioritize our own well-being.
And what about Butler's legacy?
Hmm, that's a tough one.
How do you think he will be remembered?
That's a question that only time can truly answer.
Right.
His teachings have touched many lives,
Uh-huh.
but the allegations of harm and manipulation are impossible to ignore.
It seems like his legacy will forever be marked by this duality, the
Yeah.
charismatic leader who inspired many,
Right.
but also caused considerable pain and controversy.
Precisely. And that duality is something we need to grapple with
Yeah.
as we continue to explore the complexities of spiritual leadership
Mm-hmm.
and the importance of safeguarding ourselves against potential abuse.
Well said. So we've covered a lot of ground here,
We have.
exploring the darker aspects of SIF and the warning signs of potentially harmful spiritual groups.
Uh-huh.
But there's another piece of this puzzle that we need to examine.
Okay.
The voices of those who have been directly impacted by SIF,
Right.
both positively and negatively.
Yeah, that's important.
That's where we'll pick up in our next segment.
Okay, so it's good.
We'll delve into the personal stories of individuals who have been touched by SIF,
Right.
examining the lasting effects of their experiences,
Yeah.
and the ongoing debate surrounding Butler's legacy.
Okay.
It's important to remember that there's no single narrative that captures the entire SIF experience.
That's true.
We need to hear from a diverse range of voices to fully understand the complexities of this organization and its impact. So, dear listener, stay tuned as we continue our deep dive into the world of Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation. So we spent the last two segments really unpacking some pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Allegations of financial impropriety, potential cult-like practices, and this controversial connection to Tulsi Gabbard.
Right.
It paints kind of like a rather bleak picture of SIF.
It does.
But as we mentioned earlier, there are also those who speak positively
Yeah?
about their experiences with the organization and with Chris Butler's teachings.
Right.
It's important to acknowledge those perspectives as well, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's crucial to remember that human experiences are complex and nuanced.
Yeah.
What might be harmful or damaging for one person could be genuinely beneficial for another.
Right.
To truly understand the impact of SIF, we need to consider the full spectrum of experiences, both positive and negative.
That makes sense. We focused a lot on the critical accounts.
We have.
But I'm curious to hear about the other side of the coin. What are some of the positive aspects that people have highlighted about their involvement with SIF?
Well, many individuals credit SIF with helping them overcome personal challenges,
Okay.
finding a sense of purpose and community, and developing a deeper connection to spirituality.
Okay.
They speak of finding solace in Butler's teachings,
Right.
which emphasize self-awareness, compassion, and the importance of living an ethical life.
It's interesting because those teachings on the surface seem quite positive
Okay.
and aligned with personal growth.
Yeah.
It's hard to reconcile that with the darker aspects we've discussed.
That's the paradox, isn't it? And it's something that many former members grapple with.
Right.
They may have experienced genuine benefits from their time in SIF, but they also recognize the potential for harm within the organization's structure and practices.
Yeah.
It's a complex and often painful journey to reconcile those conflicting experiences.
I imagine it would be.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific examples of individuals who've spoken positively about their time with SIF?
Yes, there are a number of accounts from people who credit SIF with helping them turn their lives around.
Okay.
For instance, some former drug addicts describe how SIF's emphasis on healthy living and spiritual practice provided them with the support and structure they needed to overcome addiction.
Oh, wow.
Others speak of finding solace and guidance during difficult times,
Okay.
drawing strength from the community and Butler's teachings.
So even within those positive accounts,
Yeah.
it seems like Butler's charisma and the strong sense of community within SIF played a significant role.
Undoubtedly, Butler had a unique ability to connect with people on a deeply personal level. He exuded warmth and compassion,
Right.
and his teachings resonated with many who were seeking meaning and purpose in their lives.
Yeah.
And SIF, as an organization, fostered a tight-knit community where members felt a strong sense of belonging and support.
It sounds like that sense of belonging,
Yeah.
that feeling of being part of something bigger than yourself can be incredibly powerful, especially for those who might be feeling lost or alone.
It can be a double-edged sword, though.
Right.
While that sense of community can be incredibly supportive and nurturing,
Yeah.
it can also make individuals more susceptible to manipulation and control.
Right.
It's that fine line we've been discussing throughout this deep dive.
Yeah.
The balance between devotion and critical thinking,
Mm-hmm.
between surrendering to a spiritual path
Mm-hmm.
and maintaining one's own autonomy.
And that brings us back to the question of Butler's legacy.
Yeah.
How will he be remembered, given this complex mix of positive and negative aspects?
That's a question that will likely be debated for years to come.
Right.
His teachings continue to inspire and guide many,
Uh-huh.
and there's no denying that SOF has had a profound impact on the lives of its members,
Yeah.
both past and present.
Right.
But the allegations of harm, exploitation, and potential cult-like practices have also left an undeniable stain on his reputation.
It's like a complicated tapestry,
Yeah,
woven with threads of light and darkness. It's up to each individual to examine those threads and draw their own conclusions.
exactly. There's no easy answer.
Yeah.
No simple judgment that can encapsulate the totality of Butler's impact.
Right.
It's a story filled with contradictions, complexities, and unanswered questions.
Yeah, and ultimately it's a reminder that even the most charismatic leaders,
Yeah.
the most well-intentioned organizations, are not immune to the potential for harm.
Right.
So, dear listener, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation,
Yes.
we leave you with this final thought.
Okay.
Spiritual seeking is a journey that requires courage, discernment, and a healthy dose of skepticism.
I agree.
It's about finding a path that aligns with your values, empowers you to grow,
Great.
and enhances your life without compromising your autonomy or well-being.
Remember the importance of critical thinking.
Yeah.
Even when confronted with charismatic figures and compelling teachings,
Right.
question assumptions.
Yeah.
Trust your intuition.
Uh-huh.
And never be afraid to walk away from any situation that feels harmful or manipulative.
Right.
Your spiritual journey is yours to define,
Yeah.
and you deserve a path that leads to genuine fulfillment and liberation.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
We hope this exploration has provided you with valuable insights and encouraged you to approach your own spiritual seeking with awareness, discernment, and a commitment to your own well-being.
Definitely.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.